Welcome back to the Middle of Culture. I'm one of your co-hosts, Peter.
And I'm your other erstwhile co-host, Eden.
Eden, how the heck have you been?
Pretty okay. Dog days of summer have mostly passed us by. There was a time, I think it was last week, where we had the official real temperature was like 98. Mm-hmm. But with the humidity as high as it was, the real feel was 126.
Oh my goodness, that sounds terrible.
That's not livable. That's not.
No.
People shouldn't live in that.
That's
Why do
awful.
we live here?
That's awful.
It's one of these things. Here's an interesting thing. I know that you lived previously on the East Coast where there's more humidity than you do in the Intermountain West where you currently live.
Oh, yeah.
But there's a certain type of humidity that we get here in the heartland, in the Midwest. And it's caused by a phenomenon called corn sweats.
That sounds
bad. Are you familiar with
No, I don't want the corn sweats. I don't know what it is, but it sounds bad.
I don't want the corn sweats either. However, we get them. What corn sweats are, when it gets really warm and the corn are ramping up their last bit of growing to set up to grow the kernel, to grow the cob, they emit more moisture than they're taking in.
Okay.
And so they increase the humidity wherever they are.
That's awful.
And when you live in a state that the two things we do with the vast majority of our land in this state is pig shit and corn, then when it's corn sweats time, the humidity goes crazy.
That sounds terrible. Do not like.
It's real bad.
Do not
It's
like
real bad. We need to stop growing so much corn, and we need to literally decimate the amount of pig farms that we have.
Yeah.
And start growing things that matter. But things that matter aren't what make large farms big bucks. So we keep making corn for ethanol subsidies.
Yeah, that sounds terrible.
Welcome to America.
Yeah, right. We're fortunate. It never got that hot. We had a few days that were above 100. And then today, delightfully, has been gray, kind of rainy, and in the 70s. I'm loving it. It's beautiful, but that's just me. Other people are whiny.
Today was much better. We were upper 70s, low 80s, and overcast, mostly cloudy, basically all day. And we'll be a little hot tomorrow again, upper 80s, but it's going to mostly be cool. And my partner and I are getting ready to go out of town, and she has just she was telling me last night as we were laying in bed, she was like, I have decided the weather will be nice. I haven't looked at it. I'm not going to look at it. But I have decided that the weather will be nice while we're up at the lake house. So
excellent.
Apparently, according to her, the weather will be nice.
I certainly hope that is the case. So
I guess we'll see.
Well, anything you've been into lately that you wanted to bring up before we dive into our topic of the week?
Sure, I have a few things I'd like to chat about. Firstly, dear listeners, it's important for you to know. It's important for us to make this statement, I think. Our original plan for today was to watch a Hollywood-produced film. However, in solidarity with the striking SAG-AFTRA and WGA workers, we are doing what SAG-AFTRA has asked and not doing a podcast that promotes a Hollywood property. So we are not going to be talking about that movie. And consequently, I am not going to tell you all my thoughts on the Barbie movie. So maybe whenever the strikes are over, hopefully the workers get everything that they're asking for because fuck a boss.
Sure.
Then I can tell you about the Barbie movie.
I look forward to hearing about it. I will say that as of this very moment, I am now the only member of my family who has not seen it. I look forward to hearing about it when it seems appropriate. And I do want to thank you for bringing this up and prompting us to change our plan for the week.
It's just one of those things that is anyone going to actually care or find out that this tiny podcast by these two siblings talked about some 70s movie? No. But also, if I think that worker solidarity is important, and I think that strikes are important, and that is the way that workers can collectively cause action and therefore, receive the rights due to them as workers, the least I can do is solidarity with them. And if this is what they've asked for, that's what I'll give from me.
There you go. Well,
but I have other things I can talk about too.
Let's hear. Do tell.
So I've been playing 2 video games. I'm mostly through one of them, and then I just kind of haven't played it in a few days. I'll probably go back to it though. So the sequel to this game just came out, but I've been playing the earlier, the first one. I've been playing Remnant from the Ashes, which is what if Dark Souls but gun.
Oh, okay. And
do you know what I'm better at than sword?
Gun.
Because then I can pew pew from far away. And so basically that's what Remnant is. It has a lot of the mechanics of a Souls-like game. You have to go to checkpoints where you rejuvenate, you refill your healing items, you refill your ammo, and every enemy respawns except for bosses who you've beaten. And you have to go around. There's multiple branching paths. There's lots of ways around. All the sorts of stuff you get out of a traditional Souls-like game, only this time I've got a rifle and a pistol and a sword. So, it's more of a machete, but still, doing pretty good.
Cool.
I'm really liking it. It's not a perfect game. You can definitely tell it's a first game by a studio, but it's really cool and is doing a lot of really cool things. One of the things I really like about it is, in the cosmology of this world, you transport from world to all these different places through the checkpoint system, and consequently they're able to have a lot of varied environments.
Okay.
Which apparently is much more the case in the second film. Like, the environments are way wilder and way weirder. But I do like that that's part of this game fundamentally, is there's a one world you go to where it's a desert. There's one world you go to where it is a, jungle. There's, it starts on the planet Earth, which is like a post-apocalyptic wasteland where you find yourself, where everything's overgrown. It feels like, that sort of vibe. But I'm really liking it. I think it's a pretty fun game. I'm very curious to play the second one. I'm not $50 curious, which is why I haven't purchased it yet. But I'm like $20 or $30 curious. So if and when it goes on sale in a few months, I'll probably pick it up because I've heard that it's even better. I'm really having a fun time with it, though. It's a very cool game.
And wasn't it in Humble Choice or something? Because I'm
sure it was.
I have it, and I did not pay for it individually. It wasn't something I consciously bought.
Yeah, I am certain that it was a Humble Choice, because that is also why I had it. I had heard of it, and my eye was kind of on it. But when I was like, oh yeah, when the sequel was like imminent, was in the next week or two, I was like, oh yeah, I'm pretty sure I have that, and I do, nice. With the DLC, so even better. So I'm sure that you do too. It's pretty cool. I'm really having a fun time with it. I know that the second one, it has classes you can pick from. Mm-hmm. In the second class, one of the classes is dog. You can have a dog as well as a gun, and that's even better. So nice. That's an exciting thing about playing Remnant 2 is I could have dog and gun.
Cool.
So I'll get there eventually. I'm having fun. But then the other thing I've also been playing is a farm sim called Sunhaven. I was downloading games to get ready to go out of town, making sure that they were all on my my Steam Deck, and crossplay is really nice, so I download them to my PC and then they get ported over to the Steam Deck and I can play them both places. It's handy. So I've been looking at some farm sims because those are easy games to just pick up and play for a little bit and then set down. You don't feel the pressure to be like, oh, I gotta save the world. It's just a farm sim. Mm-hmm. So I've been playing this one called Sunhaven, which is, if I were to describe it similarly to the way I described Remnant, I would say, what if Stardew Valley but for furries? it's like Stardew Valley. You go around and meet a bunch of people, but like, do you want to be a human or an elf or a demon or a lamia or like a cat person or a dog person or a lizard person? And so you have all these options of what kind of person you want to be. And, you know, you move to this town and you start farming and you do all sorts of weird stuff. And the dragon that is protecting that town is like, yo, bad stuff is coming. So you're going to be my emissary, farmer, because I need an emissary. So go do this stuff for me. And, you know, you're going around town, you're going in the mines, you're doing some combat in the woods to try to get stronger and get more resources. You're flirting with all of the, you know, women in the town, because who wants to flirt with a man? Not this guy. But so anyway, been building my relationship with all the people in the town. And then eventually the dragon's like, hey, you got to go find the Alpha Village. And I was like, oh, what Alpha Village? And I went through the woods very far and found the elf village, where they presented me with another farm. And they were like, welcome, farmer. Now you have 2 farms. One in the elf village and one in the regular village. So luckily there's a griffin there. And if I give the griffin a berry, he flies me back and forth between my farms. And I'm having a good time with it. I'm currently in the elf farm. I know there's a demon farm out there because I ran into some demon people who I haven't met yet. And I'm like, I know they gotta be a demon farm out there that I'm going to get. This is going to be a 3 farm game for sure. Mm-hmm. So I'm having a fun time with it.
Nice.
And then the last thing I want to mention, I've been reading some comics. I think I mentioned previously that I was finally able to get volume 3 of Kaoru Mori's Emma. So I've gotten the first couple of volumes of that read, really enjoying it. It was really fun in that first volume to see how much she grew as an artist. I think I maybe talked about this already, but regardless. I also read the first 2 volumes of a brand new comic that's been coming out called She Loves to Cook and She Loves to Eat, which is a comic about this woman who lives alone and really loves to cook and wants to make like big elaborate meals, but she doesn't eat that much. So she only makes small meals, and she wishes she could make very large, meals. And then she runs into her neighbor, who is this extremely tall, extremely broad woman who, as they're getting in their elevator to go to their apartment one day, has like a 20-piece bucket from KFC. And so the neighbor was like, oh, you got a bunch of stuff to like have KFC for the week. And she was like, no, I'm eating this all tonight. And so then the other woman is like, oh, what if I make huge food for my neighbor? And that is how they become friends, is one of them makes enormous meals and then they eat them together. And it's a very interesting comic because you're going to be like, why are you reading this, Eden? But I'm going to say it anyway. You can tell that the creator has a fetish for watching people eat food. Like, okay. You can tell that is like, fundamentally, this is a fetish book. But it's like, for the most innocuous chaste fetish that you could possibly imagine. Because it's not sexual in any way, shape, or form. It's not like salacious. It is just watching this very large woman eat very large portions of food with gusto. But it's also an extremely tender exploration of how you become a friend as an adult when you're single and like don't have family or anything. Like, that's hard. It's really hard. It's even hard when you do have that stuff. But like, especially if you live alone, it's so hard to make friends with people and to find connection. And so for these 2 women to have become friends with one another and to build this friendship organically, which has by the end of volume 2 become more than friendship. Like, they truly have come to really care for each other. And the one woman who does all the cooking has like this epistemological break where she's like, oh no, I think I'm attracted to her. What does that mean? And so like she's clearly a person who has lived a very sheltered life, doesn't know anything about like, same gender attraction. So she does some Googling and she's like, lesbian? The word is lesbian? Is that what I am? Am I one of those, I guess? And it's just very tender and like heartfelt and sweet in a way that I wasn't necessarily expecting. So I really had a good time with it. I'm very curious to read the 3rd volume when it comes out later this year.
Cool.
But yeah, anyway, that's what I've been doing. What have you been up to?
So I have, not a lot. I still slowly working on the Wheel of Time, kind of, sort of. We'll talk more about books in just a minute. Spoilers. A couple albums that came out recently that I think are worth bringing up briefly. The band Rannoch released their new album Conflagrations. It's a very interesting blend of some death metal, some black metal, very progressive elements, some jazz influences, and kind of goes all over the place. And I have been enjoying it, though I will admit things have been busy enough that a lot of times when I'm turning on music, it's stuff that I'm very familiar with. So it can just kind of run in the background, whether it's clinic or when I'm running or lifting or something like that. And so I haven't had the time to sit down and really appreciate it. But the bits that I have, I've been impressed. Don't know if you were aware of this. Seven Dust just released a new album, Truth Killer, and it's very Seven Dust. I mean, Seven Dust has been incredibly consistent over the years, for good or bad. It is not an album that I will listen to start to finish, but there are definitely some good tracks on it. And again, sometimes I really like the sound that Seven Dust makes, and I think that LaJohn Witherspoon, the lead vocalist, has a great voice and is a little unique in that style of music, and so it's kind of nice to hear that. There's an app I want to mention because it is it's fairly inexpensive. I want to say it's maybe $4.99, but it is brilliant. It is fantastic. It is excellently made. I have been using it for 4.5 weeks, almost 5 weeks now. It is wonderful. It is called Watch to 5K. So as I may have mentioned a couple weeks ago, I'm really starting to focus on a little bit more my physical health as well as some other things that I want to do. And as part of that, I decided I was going to start running again just 2 times a week. There's a whole complicated thing involving lifting weights 6 days a week, running twice, riding a bike twice, jumping rope twice, all sorts of stuff. Anyway, the running, I wanted to start off with the Couch to 5K program because it has been many years since I ran. I used to run regularly. I've run 3 marathons. I've done a bunch of half marathons. But it's been a while, I think really since the last time I messed up my knee, since I ran. And so I decided I wanted to start doing it again. And Watch to 5K, you buy it on the phone and then it has a companion watch app. But really the only part that matters is the watch. So yes, this is an Apple Watch app. Yes, I am deep into the Apple ecosystem. I just, whatever. That's the way I am. And that is a bit of a change as who used to be a very hardcore Windows guy. So what I do is I've loaded some playlists of music on my Apple Watch. I have paired a pair of headphones with my Apple Watch. And so when I get up tomorrow morning, very early, because both I have to because of work, but also, I don't really need people observing the catastrophe that is me running these days, but hey, that's okay. But so I just pop in the headphones, open the music app on my watch, start playing a playlist, and then I go to Watch to 5K, and it has in there, programmed into the watch, every single one of the workouts for the 9-week program. And I don't run with my phone. I don't have to do anything. I just have the watch on my wrist, headphones in my ear, start listening to music, hit go, and it just walks you right through it. When to walk, when to run, all that stuff takes you through it. It works flawlessly. It gives really nice data using the GPS in the watch. When it's all said and done, I was trying to make my own kind of couch to 5K thing with different timer apps that I had, and I was really frustrated and upset with them. And then I found this one, and boy, howdy, I tell you, if anyone wants to start running and wants to use the couch to 5K program, I cannot recommend Watch to 5K enough. If you are in the Apple ecosystem, it is excellent. It's made by one guy, and I just wanted to bring it up because I love when you find these sort of bespoke, really focused apps made by one or two people. And I think that it's fantastic, and I wanted to get it out there. The final thing I want to mention, and I hope that this doesn't really, and I'm going to make it brief because I don't want to sort of violate the spirit of respecting SAG-AFTRA and stuff, but I have to say, I have to get this off my chest. Eden, have you watched Secret Invasion on Disney Plus?
No, I don't care about that shit.
It is the worst. It is
there you go.
The worst Marvel property I have ever seen.
I mean, that's pretty bad.
It is the worst MCU related Marvel property I have ever seen.
That's still pretty bad.
It writes a check that it is absolutely incapable of cashing. Are you ever going to watch it?
No.
Okay, then I'm just going to look and listen, people. Spoilers. I don't care. It's bad. First of all, Nick Fury sucks. We find out that all of these times we thought that Nick Fury was ahead of things because he's smart and he was always one step ahead of people. It's only because for the last 30 plus years, he has basically enslaved Skrull to impersonate other people and be his spies everywhere. So it's not because he knows anything or he's good in any way. It's because he has been taking advantage of the Skrulls and using them to find out all this stuff. So he alone, pretty worthless. Finally, the thing I just want to say is and this is, okay, Star Wars Episode 8, The Last Jedi or whatever the crap that stupid movie was called. It breaks almost all of Star Wars in that scene where whatever Admiral What's-Her-Face accelerates to hyperspace or whatever. I can't even remember anymore which is Star Wars and which is Star Trek. But like destroys the enemy fleet by just accelerating to hyperspace through them. Completely breaks all of Star Wars because you just sit there and go, well, why didn't they just do that all the time then if it was that powerful?
Why didn't they do that to the Death Star?
They do a similar thing where they have now, perhaps without thinking about it, which makes me even more concerned, but they have completely ruined the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And they've done so because, part of this Secret Invasion storyline, they want to work in the idea of Super Skrull, but we don't have the Fantastic Four. So basically we've got this bad Skrull who's adopting the powers and blah, blah, blah. At some point, Nick Fury is sending out Skrull to collect the DNA of all of the bad people and the Avengers after the Battle of Earth. And we end up with a character played by Emilia Clarke who has basically absorbed the abilities of every single Avenger and many of the enemies. We see things like Cull Obsidian. We see them using Ebony Maw's powers. They think at one point their arm even looks like Thanos. So now we have a character who has all of the powers of all of the superheroes.
Oops, all powers.
How does that not completely fuck up the entire universe?
I'll tell you how. Because nobody fucking watched that show, and so they're never bringing Emilia Clarke back for anything.
Boy, it was rough.
That character is gone forever. Sorry if you liked her, friends.
It was so bad. It was so bad. And so many just missteps. And anyway, nobody should watch it. I feel bad saying it. I definitely am finding myself becoming less invested and interested in the Marvel stuff. And this one, this is bad enough that in a similar way to the way the prequels for Star Wars sort of turned me off for all Star Wars, no matter how good it may or may not be, this felt a little bit when I finished it like it was similar to that. Like, it's that bad.
I genuinely think that the bubble might have burst on the MCU, bro.
You know,
It might be game over for those guys because, like, I don't know a single person who has cared about a single Marvel thing that has come out since the last Spider-Man movie.
yeah, I was gonna say
Like,
No Way Home was
nobody,
probably the
like,
last really.
Black Panther came out and I went and saw it and I was like, that was fine. And I've never thought about it again. So clearly it's not that good if it had literally no sticking power in my brain. I never saw Ant-Man. I never saw Guardians of the Galaxy. Thor Love and Thunder fucking sucks. I didn't watch Secret Invasion. I'm not going to be watching Loki season 2, which I just saw an advertisement for. Like, I think I'm done. I think I'm maybe just done and will maybe... The same thing has happened to me with Marvel movies that has happened to me with Marvel comics. There are very few characters that I still pick up their comic book every month when it comes out because I just already do it.
Yeah.
It is She-Hulk, it is Captain Marvel, it is Miss Marvel. And those are the 3 Marvel comics that I buy. Guess what Marvel properties I'll probably check in on if they show up in the future? I'll probably go see the Marvels, and I'll probably check in on a season 2 of She-Hulk if that happens. And other than that, I kind of feel like the curse has been lifted. The evil has been defeated. I can do something else with my precious time.
Yeah. Like I say, I just had to get Secret Invasion off my chest because it was...
Here's the thing.
bad.
Talking about it might not be following the letter of the law, but telling everybody who listens to this podcast that it was terrible, no one should watch it, and it maybe broke the MCU for you, I think is following the spirit of the law, because I don't think any of our listeners are going to turn around now and say, you know, I should just pull up my Disney Plus and check out Secret Invasion.
And they should not. They should not.
So I think the spirit of solidarity has been maintained.
I'm glad. I was hoping so. So what is our topic for the day? Well, this could be really short. It could be really long. I don't know. But what we kind of thought about and what I suggested when we decided to, rise up in solidarity and not watch this Hollywood movie was to talk about books. And I have a pretty big list of things that I want to bring up. And some of these we may talk about very briefly and some may be a little longer. But they're just sort of books that we have read, books that had impact on our lives, on perhaps our likes, our dislikes, things that have been, I kind of broke mine down into 3 categories. I've got what I'm calling the foundational sort of books that I think really shaped the way I approach fiction. Then I've got kind of the modern movers and shakers, things that are more recent, that, it's kind of like, here's the chunk of things that were in my before the age of 20. Here's the chunk of things between 20 and now. And then finally, I've got the things that I'm going to talk about briefly that are just bad books. So I don't know.
I have a similar breakdown based on our text the other day. I wrote down some that are like really influential to me, some things I really loved, just a couple things I really hate, and some stuff I think is really overrated.
Excellent. So I was thinking, don't know how long each other's lists are, but we could start off just going back and forth one book or one item on our list at a time, kind of talk about it. If the other person has feelings about it and wants to share, we'll do that. And if it's something that, only one of us has read, then we can move on to the next person. How does that sound?
I think that sounds great.
All right, so I'm going to start.
I think this is going to be very fun because I think we're going to have extremely different lists. Because as I was writing down my influential books, I was like, I'm such a pretentious asshole.
I'm glad you recognize that. I'm just kidding. But what I do think, I was thinking the same thing. As I was making my list, I was like, these are going to be very, very different. And mine are pretty lame. I'm the first to admit it. I am a simple, basic bitch. You can be the pretentious asshole. I'll be the basic bitch.
Look, I have a PhD in literature. What the hell do people want from me?
And see, my counter for me is that I have, I'm a medical doctor who literally has sacrificed so many years of my life by losing sleep and working 80 to 125 hours a week that sometimes my reading is going to be like, can I please turn my brain off for the most part and just sort of veg out while I look at words? So that's my defense as to why so many of my picks are so basic. And again, I'm the basic bitch of the duo.
You know what? There's nothing wrong with that. I was talking with some friends just earlier today. I was talking to some friends earlier today, and it was in a Discord, and one of my friends in the Discord was like, phone lock screen check-in. So everyone was posting, screenshots of their lock screen their lock screen. I have the most basic bitch lock screen in the world. It's just the Sailor Scouts. And it's like, I'm just kind of a basic bitch. So it's okay to be a basic bitch is what I'm saying.
I mean, I am. So, it's cool. And in the spirit of that basicness, I'm going to start off with the Sword of Shannara, and I'm going to pronounce it that way, and I don't care what Terry Brooks wants.
I don't care what Terry Brooks says.
So why am I bringing up the Sword of Shannara? Well, look, it was, and this is one of these funny things that stuck with me. Does anybody know, do you remember how many pages the trade paperback copy of the Sword of Shannara is?
It's like 726 or something.
That is exactly right. It is 726. Because when I started
knew that
reading,
number in my brain.
I know, for the same reason I do, because I started reading the Sword of Shannara in, I think, 3rd grade. And I was so excited to be reading this 726-page fantasy book. I read the Sword of Shannara. I read the Elfstones, the Wish Song. I read a bunch of them. I haven't read any of the ones written in probably the last 20 years, maybe a little bit more than that. But at the time, I really, really enjoyed the Sword of Shannara. I've tried to go back and read it. It's rough. Can't do it. But at the time, that was, for me, actually the book that set me on the path of really liking epic fantasy. And while I don't think that Terry Brooks' stuff really hangs with some of the other more recent epic fantasy, it's a little more simple. It's a little more easy to get into, but that's okay. But for me, it was super foundational because really that was where I was like, okay, I'm liking this. It's a big, long book with, just a lot in it. And kind of in that, fitting that epic fantasy, we've got to save the world, good against evil sort of thing. And this, for me, was my introduction. So there's my first entry. Thoughts, comments, or what's your first one?
I also read the Sword of the Sword of Shannara, not Shannara. I don't care what he says. But after I met him that one time, like, Shannara was in my brain so strong, even though I hate the way it feels coming out of my mouth, that I still sometimes think of it that way.
It does feel dirty.
It feels gross. It's just the mouth feels wrong. So I also read that as a very young person, and it was foundational. I'm going to start with maybe the most basic bitch answer that I could possibly start with. This is not even on my written down list, but after hearing you talk about Sword of Shannara, it's The Hobbit, dog. Like, I read The Hobbit when I was like 7, and that book slaps. And it's clearly the best book Tolkien ever wrote by a country mile. Sorry, not sorry, The Lord of the Rings. It still hangs. Lord of the Rings, if you try to read Lord of the Rings in 2023 and you're like, whew, it's fine. I see why everyone has been cribbing this for 70 years, but whew. You read The Hobbit and you're like, oh, what a weekend. What a pleasant spree. Rules. It's just a good book. That's all I'll say about The Hobbit.
Okay. Sounds good.
My pretentious answers will be coming. Okay. Listeners, don't worry.
Well, so my second answer then is the basic extension of your answer, and that would be The Lord of the Rings. I actually have a hard time with The Hobbit. I really don't get that interested in it. I am definitely not one of the people who goes back and reads Lord of the Rings every year or two. I've read all 3 books, I think 2, maybe 3 times. But again, it was that sort of, as you mentioned, everybody in fantasy has been influenced by Tolkien, whether they are stealing or copying ideas, building on the foundations that he went with, or at least in my opinion, in the case of, for example, George R.R. Martin, trying to just like drop their drawers and take a dirty, smelly shit all over Tolkien and kind of what he established as fantasy norms. But everybody, I think, to some degree, and I think, the further away we get, probably is starting to vary, but for so many years, everything had some relationship to that in some way. And, I enjoyed it. Again, that was kind of the first thing I moved on to after I read The Sword of Shannara I think I read The Hobbit first, but then I said, okay, now I need to do The Lord of the Rings. And I think I remember reading that in 4th grade. And again, I don't go back and read it. I don't hold it in that regard that, you hear some people holding it where it's almost like it's a religious tome for them. But I appreciated it. And it's, again, in terms of what I enjoy and what I read, absolutely foundational.
Here's what I'll say. I do prefer The Hobbit. And every time I try to reread The Lord of the Rings, as soon as I get past, not stop at, but as soon as I leave Tom Bombadil, my interest plummets. And that's because old Tom Bombadil was a merry fellow. Bright blue his jacket was, and his boots were yellow. I love that guy. I just like Tom Bombadil. What can I say?
That's okay.
Okay, my next answer. Cool. My next answer, like I say, a little pretentious, but it's important as a foundational text for who I am as a person. I started college back up. I did a semester. I moved to New Mexico for 2 years. In case anyone didn't know, I grew up Mormon and served a Mormon mission in New Mexico, which is where I learned Spanish, which is why I have a PhD in Spanish. But anyway, when I got home, I started taking, Spanish literature classes at the university. And I read a book by Miguel de Unamuno called Niebla, Mist in English. And that book was so important for who I am as a person and why I chose to study Spanish literature. If you're not familiar with it, it's one of the classics of early 20th century modernism, especially when it comes to Spain. And it is a story that is about, this kind of stuck in a malaise, old rich person, but not really rich anymore. Kind of, if you remember our Spirit of the Beehive movie, that family where they really didn't have the juice they used to have. Mm-hmm. It's a big house, but it's empty. And they have, staff, but a lot less staff than I bet their parents and grandparents did. And so it's about this person who's in the same situation. He meets this beautiful girl in the street. They fall in love. And she basically fleeces him. She convinces him to set up her ex-boyfriend so that he's not around to tempt her so that she can be with him. He sets him up with an apartment in a faraway city. And then, of course, what does she do? She just ghosts and goes to live with her boyfriend because he's dumb and she's smart. But the book is important because it ends with the main character being very pissed off that this all happened to him. So he hops on a train from Madrid to Salamanca, where Miguel de Unamuno lives, and shows up on the author's doorstep and says, "Why are you doing this to me? You're a dick. Why are you making my life suck?" And Unamuno is like, "Because I want to. Because I am the author. I am your God. And I can do whatever I want to you." And he's like, that's terrible. Why would you do that? Don't do that. Don't make me suffer. And he's like, "Oh, dog, I'm going to make you suffer. I'm going to kill you because you showed up at my doorstep." And then they get in this big, fight about it. And eventually he, goes home and just starts eating and eats until his stomach explodes and he dies. And that's how the book ends. And it sounds weird. You hear me say it and I'm like, okay, what is this book? But it was one of the first books where I saw that interplay between author and creation and referred and referent and all of these sorts of things made me think about literature in a way that I had never thought of literature before. And consequently, Miguel de Unamuno, the writer, became one of my favorite authors. And I, went to grad school with the idea, I am going to focus on La Generación del 98, this group of authors of which Unamuno is one of the more prominent ones. I'm going to focus on them. I had an idea of what I wanted to do for a dissertation based on this, this generation of authors and this weird, internecine period of the Second Spanish Republic when they were all writing. And that was very formative to the choices that I will talk about a little later. But that's a really important book for me.
Excellent. Well, so my next entry is a series of books, and it is The Chronicles of Prydain. And
hell yeah.
When I was younger, I don't think I truly appreciated how magical these books are. And as an adult, and having gone back and read them to some of my children, people, I'm just going to give you a little preview to the bad that's coming later. To a number of my children, I read aloud to them the Harry Potter books. And then at some point I decided I needed to read something to my children that wasn't dog shit. And so then I read The Chronicles of Prydain. And I will never forget sitting there reading, reading The High King to my oldest. And as Cole, son of Colfrur, is dying and has sacrificed himself, I am ugly crying. Like, tears are running down my face and I cannot speak because I am so moved by the sacrifice that this noble farmhand has made to save the land of Prydain. And even just thinking about it, I mean, my eyes are misting up and stuff because they are so incredibly good. And yeah, they're YA novels. And yeah, they're fairly short. And you know what? They are some of the absolute best fantasy and best sort of Bildungsroman novels that I think have ever been written. They are beautiful. The characters are well realized. They are relatable. They are, you've got everything you need in an epic fantasy. You have the battle between good and evil. You have magic. You've got sorcery. You've got, warriors and this, that, and the other. But when you get right down to it, these are stories about people and the way they grow and the way they change. And as the main character, Taran, accepts the responsibility, he goes from wanting nothing more than to be a hero to begrudgingly accepting his role as the hero of Prydain, as he has grown and developed over the course of these novels. It is beautiful. They are wonderful books. And there are far too few people that when I'm talking about books and I bring this up, the vast majority of people just give me this, look, and it is a shame. They are marvelous, and Disney did them dirty by making a really bastardized story that they called The Black Cauldron that was this weird mishmash of the first two books that doesn't do the actual books, and especially the second book, The Black Cauldron. It does not do it any justice because of the way that book actually culminates and the climax of that. But they are so good. And just talking about them makes me just want to evangelize them even more, because more people should be reading and talking about these books, and more kids should be reading and experiencing these books.
I'm with you. We were walking out of seeing a film the other day, and I was talking with Cassie about how Greta Gerwig, after her success with the Barbie film, has apparently signed with Disney to make Chronicles of Narnia movies. Oh. To which I jokingly said, who cares about the Chronicles of Narnia and a big dumb lion who's actually Jesus? Where are my good Chronicles of Prydain movies?
Yes. Yes.
And I maintain that it's true. Do you know what's better than Narnia and Harry Potter combined? The Chronicles of Prydain.
Oh, 100%. They're not even in the same league. These are like completely different. Yeah. So love these books. And
they're great. If you haven't read them, go read them. They're so good.
They really are.
All right. My next one, this is a little nebulous, but I think it's worth mentioning in terms of like foundational influences because, I talked about how I decided to go to grad school and I was like, I'm going to study early 20th century Spain. If you know anything about me, listeners, that's not what my dissertation's about at all. It's not about Spain at all because I don't think Spanish literature is worthy of my time and energy. And that is thanks to a writer named Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz, who is a nun from early New Spain, from the 17th century, and reading her poetry and essays. So that's how it's a book. It's the Obras Completas I have in the other room. It's her collected works. And reading her poetry and essays was the thing that made me, that planted in me an interest in Latin American literature that would eventually blossom into what I literally got my dissertation in. The way that she writes and the way that she frames things and the story of her life and, the way that she encapsulates so many different emotions in her poetry. There is, she wrote one of the earliest proto-feminist poems ever written called Hombres Necios. And it is literally about why, these men are terrible because they treat women like crap and then they slut shame them, and like that is all they only see us as Madonnas or whores, and all they are these little boys who bring absolutely nothing to the world. And it was just like, yo, the first time I read that. And so a combination of that and like getting to know her and what happened to her life, because, she was so well read in her time that, a lot of people were looking to her, were coming to visit her in the convent and all this sort of stuff. And eventually that pissed the viceroy and the bishop off. So the bishop decided to like stick it to her. And so, they like brought her up on all of these terrible charges, and eventually, the bishop wrote a fake letter accusing her of all this stuff under the name of the nun Sor Filotea, who did not exist, and she wrote this response to Sor Filotea, and it is like basically a response that, again, it's one of the really early feminist works, like fundamentally significant feminist writings, as she advocates for women's intellectual rights and the importance of women being able to live their own lives out from under the control of men, whether that be spouses or whether that be the church, and that women are doing this anyway. And that is the thing that is most prevalent in her work, is that women are doing this anyway. We are doing it in the kitchen, and we are seeing the stars in the flower on the table. And so who are you to help keep us from seeing the stars for ourselves, And her work is just so incredible and so fundamental to me that it made me think about Latin America and Latin American literature a lot more carefully and a lot more fully, which is why I eventually, during the course of my master's work, decided I think I want to focus on Latin America instead of Spain. And so that is why she's so important to me.
Nice. So for my next one, and I'll make this one, I think, fairly brief, but I'm going to definitely throw out the book Childhood's End by Arthur C. Clarke. Childhood's End was, I think I might have got it through like a Scholastic book sale or something. I don't know. But I was very young when I first read it. And Childhood's End would be definitely the first of sort of my exposure to golden age of science fiction authors and works. And Childhood End is, it's an interesting book. I look at the time I read it and I think I was way too young to really be appreciating it, because it's kind of heavy the way it ends, and really just so many of the things that it addresses. But again, it was for me that first exposure to really sort of that golden age of science fiction. Those authors, Arthur C. Clarke and Ray Bradbury and Asimov and sort of those guys. And Childhood End was one that stuck with me. I've read a bunch of other things by many of those authors, and I don't know if it's because it was my first or if because I think it's an underrated gem, but I think Childhood's End really was the one that jumped out at me and has stuck with me ever since.
Nice. Next one I'll do really quick. Was the first time that I read, again, I'm so fucking pretentious. The first time I read the Florentine Codex, book 12 specifically of the Florentine Codex, which I read for a course and is the reason why I am interested in the conquest, which is the entire basis of my entire dissertation, was suddenly, okay, so I moved from Spain to Latin America, and then thanks to this book, I decided to focus specifically on the conquest, narratives of conquest, and the way that the conquest was told, both in contemporary things, which is what the Florentine Codex is, and then eventually in present-day comic books, which is what my entire dissertation is about. Really quickly, the Florentine Codex was this huge, one of the earliest ethnographic research studies to ever exist, under the auspices of this Franciscan friar named Bernardino de Sahagún, and he basically put together all of the people who had gone to his students at the Colegio de Santa Cruz de Tlatelolco, and they put together an ethnography of what pre-Columbian Mexica, or Aztec in the popular nomenclature, what Aztec life was like before the arrival of the Spaniards. And that is what book 1 through 11 are about. It goes into cosmology, it goes into, ritual, it goes into economics, flora and fauna, and basically describes what the entire culture of the Aztec people was like. And then book 12, which was the last one completed, and I think is the most important one, is telling the conquest story from the Tlatelolco point of view. In other words, Tlatelolco was one of the allies of Tenochtitlan, which was the main power that was specifically conquered by the Spanish, in ally with the Tlaxcaltecas. So this is specifically written from the point of view of the conquered, of those who were conquered. And seeing the way that text is navigated, because the thing that's interesting about it is that it was written simultaneously in Nahuatl and Spanish at the same time. So if you look at the page, there's two columns. There's a column in Nahuatl and there's a column in Spanish. So obviously I can't read Nahuatl because I'm not that smart, but there's really good translations of it. And so to be able to see what is omitted from one version of the text, one version of the story, and what is added, or the ways that different points of view are shared, or differ between these two, tellings of the story, because often someone's going to be able to engage with one of it and not the other one. Maybe you only know Nahuatl and you don't know Spanish, then you're only going to be able to read half of this book, vice versa for Spanish. And then simultaneously, these were illustrated codices. So there is a third text going concurrently in the images that also sometimes tells a different story than you're getting in the two written accounts. And that interplay between these three texts simultaneously was so fundamental into A, making me care about the conquest in a way I hadn't previously, B, make me think about the interplay between text and image, and C, think about the ways that we use images and text to lie, to omit, to declare, and to elide, which is what my entire dissertation is about.
Nice. Very cool. So the next one I'm going to mention, and I'll mention it briefly because, again, it's one that I have some conflicted feelings about, and that is the book Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card. all of Orson Scott Card's other garbage to the side, I still think Ender's Game is an excellent book. I think it's really interesting. I think that there's some things to it, again, that have been highly influential in sort of just how I think about science fiction and things like that. And while a lot of, again, his other stuff doesn't really hold up, I think that Ender's Game still is an excellent book that I really enjoy. And, there's some things about it that are heavy. I mean, there's some real brutal violence with kids, between kids and stuff. But I think Ender's Game still is one of those that definitely has influenced highly kind of how I think about things, at least in terms of science fiction literature. So,
all right, the last one I'm going to mention my influences list is Raymond Williams's Marxism in Literature. Marxism in Literature is a text about cultural analysis and cultural critique through a Marxist lens. It was one of the foundational texts that said, what if we do textual criticism through the lens of Marxism? And that was foundational to both the way that I think about concepts in literature and cultural theory and my politics. So Raymond Williams, thanks, bro. Two thumbs straight up.
Very good. My last really foundational one, which we've talked about at some length, actually pretty early on when we started the podcast, but I need to mention it. I would be remiss if I did not. And that is the original Dune by Frank Herbert. We still see to this day so many ways in which Dune has impacted science fiction and in some ways fantasy. Incredibly foundational book. Shame that some of the other Dune books didn't hold up, and we may circle back around to some of the other things in the Dune world later. But Dune itself definitely, in my opinion, has withstood the test of time, and as I have reread it, I still quite enjoy it and think that it is a great book. So that is my last foundational entry.
Nice.
All right, what you got for us next?
All right, so moving into books that we just love, that maybe are not as foundational, but books that are definitely worth mentioning. The first one I'll mention is the duology of The Parable of the Sower and The Parable of the Talents by Octavia Butler. I really like Octavia Butler. I've read most of her stuff. I have not read the Pattern Master series, but I've read the rest of her stuff. Patternist is on my Kobo to take on vacation. We'll see if I read that or something else during my trip this coming week. But it's the only Octavia Butler I haven't read. I really think she's great. I think everything that I've read of hers is good to great. But Parable of the Sower and Parable of the Talents are where I think that her ability to write compelling narrative shines most fully. For those of you who don't know, Parable of the Sower and Parable of the Talents are about this mid to post-apocalyptic American society. It's not apocalyptic. It is America in decline. It is America as fallen empire in decline. And things just continually get a little bit worse and a little bit worse and a little bit worse while there's a man running for president saying it with the slogan, "Making America Great Again." And until society breaks, it has an epistemological break and it no longer works the way that it did previously. And so it is about building a new society in the ashes of the society that has fallen, and building it around this concept. This is sometimes called the Earthseed duology. And it's the idea of, it's a fictional religion based on the idea that God is change. That is the biggest thing about Earthseed as a religion. And that is what it is. All that you touch, you change. All that you change, changes you. The only lasting truth is change. That is the idea behind Earthseed as a religion and the society that is built in these two books. I will forever be sad that the trilogy was not completed. It was supposed to be followed by Parable of the Trickster, but it did not get finished before Octavia Butler sadly passed away. So we will never get a third book in the series, but it is incredible. It is, I think, some of the finest American fiction of the last 60 years, no question.
Very good. So in my section of things that are kind of things I've read more recently that matter, I'm going to lump a few of these together briefly and mention, like I have to say it, The Wheel of Time, just because it has occupied so many hours of my life. I'm still not sure how much I love it all, but it's definitely something that I have invested enough time in that it almost feels like it would be disingenuous to not mention it. And kind of as a corollary to that, in that lots of books that I have read many times, I am going to mention the Dresden Files by Jim Butcher. I don't know if you're familiar with them at all. Harry Dresden, Wizard for Hire in Chicago, Modern Times. Starts out feeling kind of like a noir detective sort of thing, with the twist being that the detective also is a wizard, and that magic is real. And what initially feels like sort of a case of the book thing then starts to get bigger and bigger and starts tying into all the different supernatural factions throughout the world, including vampires and the Fae and all sorts of things. And by the time you get to the end of book 17, Harry Dresden has put himself in a seriously, let's say, compromising situation, but you totally understand why he got there. They're easy, they're pulpy. The audiobooks for these are fantastic. They're read by James Marsters. In fact, he was so good at this that due to contract issues, he couldn't read, I think it was the 13th book, and Amazon went back and rehired him to reread that book as well, because there was so much outcry from fans that it wasn't him. They're in here. There's 17 books, including, and that does not include a couple collections of sort of side stories. Pretty much every time a new Dresden Files book comes out, I start at book 1 and I just go all the way through again. So I have made it through some of these books probably 4 or 5 times. I really enjoy them. They're not world changing, but they are so much fun and they're incredibly compelling. And I had to mention, because again, I've given these books a lot of my time, but because I thoroughly, thoroughly enjoy them.
I have beef with Jim Butcher, but we don't need to talk about it because we're running out of time.
Well, I will say there's some issues that I definitely have with some things in the books, and I don't. I was sharing them with one of my children, and I said to them, I said, hey, just be aware there are some issues with some things that he does, but I still like the stories enough that I'm sticking with them.
There you go. All right, I'm going to go quick through my other loved ones. I have 3 I want to mention really quickly. First off, the book Nothing by Carmen Laforet. It is a book about the post-war Spain set in the 1940s. It's maybe my favorite book. If gun to my head, I think it's my favorite novel. It's very good. Highly recommended. Another quick one I would put on here is Rayuela Hopscotch by Julio Cortázar. If you're ever at like a team building exercise and they're like, ooh, what's your desert island book? My desert island book would be Hopscotch by Julio Cortázar, because you don't have to read it in order. It is a counter novel, so you can read the chapters in whatever order you want, and sometimes that can reveal things to you in the narrative that you didn't recognize previously. And there is like it can be read either straightforward, chapter 1 to chapter 100 and whatever. It can also be read with a recommended reading order, which is basically like reading a choose your own adventure book, where you start with chapter 1 and then you move to chapter 17, then you move to chapter 102, and it like jumps you back and forth. Or you can just read it in whatever order you want, and it changes your experience with the book. And then lastly, just a book that I really like a lot. I've mentioned it many times here, but it deserves a shout out. Grace of Sorcerers by Maria Ying, my book of 2022. I love it. Go read it. It's great.
Excellent. I'll wrap up with the last few of my recent ones that I really like. I have to mention Mistborn, and really the whole Mistborn series by Brandon Sanderson. I know we've talked about him before. I'm a fan. And Mistborn was the one that really got me into it. As much as I enjoy his big, massive epic, The Stormlight Archive, I think I enjoy Mistborn more. I think that it's in some ways a more interesting world, almost in part because it's not quite as huge and expansive. It feels a little more focused. But I really love the Mistborn series. And in the second chunk of the Mistborn series, the Wax and Wayne books, those are probably two of my favorite characters in modern literature, just because they're so much fun to sort of hang out with as you read those books. I'm going to throw out Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn, the trilogy by Tad Williams. It starts with the Dragonbone Chair, the Stone of Farewell, and ends with Two Green Angel Tower. Very much epic fantasy, sort of in the ilk of Tolkien, but, it feels distinct. His characters that are sort of the elves are very different, very distinct. And it's again focusing on Simon, the main character, and his growth over the course of the novels. I've read them many times, and in some ways I'd like to think that Two Green Angel Tower might be one of the reasons, or at least part of the reason, that I got accepted to medical school at Duke. I was in one of my interviews, and as kind of a gotcha, we're going to see, are you well-rounded? The interviewer asked me, what was the last book you read? I had been reading part 1 of Two Green Angel Tower because it's large enough that when they published it in paperback, it's 2 1,000-page books. And I pulled that out of my backpack and I said, well, this is what I was reading while I was waiting for my time with you. And then they asked me about it and I explained to them what it was, and they were very interested. And I would like to think that made them realize that I wasn't just a stick-in-the-mud egghead like some of the people I was interviewing with, but that I actually was a well-rounded human being. Whether that's actually true or not, who knows, but I think it helped. And then the final book I have to read or mention, probably my favorite book of all time. And I would say this because when I finished this book, it was a solid 3 months before I was able to read anything else. Because as soon as I would start another book, I was like, but it's not as good as this book. And that is the debut novel by British author Nick Harkaway, and that book is The Gone Away World. I'm just going to say this about it. Number 1, greatest twist in my experience in a book. I literally had to close it, set it down, turn to my wife and said, that just screwed with my brain. I cannot read it more tonight, and all I want to do is read it more tonight. And look, there are pirates, there are ninjas, and there are mimes. And maybe some of those mimes are pirates, and maybe some of those mimes are ninjas. And that's all you need to know. It is insane. It is fantastic. And it is probably my favorite book of all time.
Nice. It's been on my to-read list since you told me about it 15 plus years ago, and I just have never gotten around to it.
Yeah, it's okay. But it's a book that it's definitely, it's kind of in there where it's like, ooh, I haven't read that in a while. I need to go back and read it again. So we're going a little long here, but why don't we wrap up with what are some books that either were bad, we thought were overrated, that we want to, now we've been, we've lauded a number of books. Now let's just crap on some others.
Let's do it. I'm going to crap on one that you just talked a lot about because I have to. I tried Mistborn. I can't do it. I think Brando Sando sucks. I can't do it. We read that novella for our podcast and I was like, this is okay. Maybe I'll try a Mistborn. It is not for me, friends. I don't like it.
That's all
so good. I'm glad you like it. I know I have a lot of friends who really like Brando Sando. I ain't that. It ain't me. And that's okay. Another one I will mention that I was talking about with a friend just earlier today. This is a book that on paper is so incredibly my shit, but in practice, I think it sucks. And that is the book House of Leaves by Mark Danielewski, which is a book of epistolary metafiction is how I would describe it. It is a metafictional text that is about a documentary film and has a bunch of like epistolary, matter to it. So it is not just like a narrative that you read through. There's like, court filings and documents and transcripts of interviews and all that sort of stuff, and pretends like it's an academic book that is about the creation of this documentary film. But it is so pretentious. I have never read a book that is more pretentious than House of Leaves. And I like an epistolary novel. I was thinking just earlier today, man, I haven't read a good epistolary novel in a very long time. I need to read one. Not this one. This one's bad. Don't read it. And then the last one I'll say that is not, I don't feel as strongly about it being bad as I did those other two, but one that I thought I was really going to like and I was mostly just left cold by is that foundational cyberpunk text Neuromancer by William Gibson. I see what he was going for. I see the ways in which it is the genesis of so many things I really like, but I didn't care for it. I just didn't really like it that much.
Yeah, I read one book by William Gibson years ago. It was All Tomorrow's Parties. I feel like I was in the middle of something. It just didn't work for me. And kind of his, I would say, counterpart, kind of, at least in my mind, the two guys who I kind of always put together is him and Neil Stephenson. Neil Stephenson, Snow Crash is the only Neil Stephenson book that I read. And I remember enjoying it, but it has been many, many years.
I feel similarly to Snow Crash the way that I do Neuromancer. I see what it's doing. I respect the things that have followed it. I don't think it's not for me either.
Yeah. Like I say, I think I actually did on Audible. Maybe that made a difference, but it was one of these things that I made it through and I was like, okay. But have I gone back to read anything else by either Neil Stephenson or William Gibson after those two books? No, I have not. So
all I'll say, listeners, is if you want early cyberpunk, go read Trouble in Her Friends by Melissa Scott. That's all.
All right.
It's a better book. It's better than both Snow Crash and Neuromancer put together.
So a couple things that I want to mention that are just bad. Look, I already mentioned it in passing. Harry Potter, it's bad. It's poorly written.
So bad.
It's really,
so
really
bad.
Poorly written. There are times where J.K. Rowling thinks she's doing one thing, but she's inept enough that she is actually doing the exact opposite. After suffering through many times with many of my children, about halfway through the fourth book with my youngest child, I closed it and I turned to them and I said, I cannot. If you would like to read this, that's on you. And gave it up and never went back. And they're bad. They're just bad. And I don't know, anyway, I'm going to leave it at that. They're bad. They're just bad.
They were bad before she was discovered to be a rank, wretched bigot, but that also doesn't help. But They were also just bad before then too.
Speaking of bigots, the rest of the Ender books and Orson Scott Card's works in general, bad. I used to read them a lot. I cannot go back. They're bad. He's bad. He should feel bad. The two final ones that I want to mention, the extra Dune books. Now, there is the initial 6 books by Frank Herbert. They are varying degrees of okay, weird, but they all are, I would reread any one of those. I may not super be excited to reread some of them. God Emperor of Dune, I'm looking at you. But I still could go back and reread them. However, the ones written by his son and Kevin J. Anderson are trash. They're horrible. They're awful. They also are bad and should feel bad, and no one should read them. They are so poorly written. One of the things that I appreciated about Frank Herbert at times, he could be very wordy, but there were other times where he was a brilliant economist of words, and he would say in a single sentence something that in your head you could create an entire exciting scene out of. There's a particular scene that I remember feeling that way about in the book Children of Dune, that really centered on one character. Kevin J. Anderson and Brian Herbert are of the mindset that why say something in 10 words that you could say in 1,000? And so you are constantly being beaten over the head by things that they do not need to tell you, but they are telling you them again and again and again in such painful and excruciating detail that I just refused to even consider going back. And then the final one I'm going to mention, and I don't know what the thoughts or feelings are on this series of books now, because it was many years ago that I read some of them. But at about the same time that the Wheel of Time was chugging along under the hand of, Robert Jordan, we had a ponytailed, pompous-looking, black turtleneck-wearing douche nugget named Terry Goodkind. And he was writing the Sword of Truth series. And they were, again, very much, they would show up in the, if you like this, and here's one of the Wheel of Time books, you'll love this, and here's one of the Sword of Truth books. And I read a number of them. And first of all, they're bad. And Terry Goodkind is an absolute misogynist and really, just from the way he writes things, I think he's a horrible person. Maybe he's not. But the things he espouses in his books makes me think he's a horrible person.
Yeah, I think that's a fair read.
And the further along I got into them, the more I realized what garbage they were and how derivative they were, despite the fact that he swears he's never read any other fantasy. These are wholly original thoughts. There are things lifted whole cloth, in particular from The Wheel of Time as well as Dune, that I'm like, it's impossible. It is impossible for you to have so perfectly stolen these ideas and not have you and had this just happen by accident. Again, they just got worse and worse and worse as they went along, and nobody should read them ever. I read too many of them. I regret it. But nobody should ever make the same mistake I did. And do not read them. They're bad. The main character is a weird combination of this sex-crazed, brooding, but at the same time he's a total Gary Stu, can do no wrong, perfect in every way sort of character who is utterly deplorable. And the remainder of the characters are as well. So screw that dude and his books.
Yeah, no, he's wretched. Also wretched.
Yeah, I would say, yes. Well, anything else you want to say before we wrap it up?
Just go read some books. Books are good.
Read some books. Books are good. And also, I would say, don't make yourself read a book that you're not enjoying. You know? I 100%. Find myself falling into that sometimes where I'm like, but I'm just going to push on through. I'm going to push on through. No, don't do it. There are so many books that are really good. And again, everybody's tastes vary. Could be that you dislike many of the books that we talked about, and that's okay unless it's the Chronicles of Prydain, and then I will judge you forever. But that's okay. I know that's just me. But yeah, if you're not liking a book, don't push through. Move on to something that you do like and you do enjoy and that brings you some type of edification, fulfillment, or joy in your life, because books are amazing and they can do that in a way that I think very few things have the power to do. So go and read. Amen.
And there's always more. Oh, yeah. There's always more books. So go read something you haven't read before, or read something that if you're, like you said, if you're reading something that's not good, stop. Nourish yourself with goodness.
Absolutely. And on that, we'll go ahead and wrap up, and we'll again thank everybody. Thanks for listening. Please subscribe if you have not. Share it if you have a chance, and leave us a review, a star rating. All those things help make it more noticeable and let other people find out, and hopefully they can join along as well. Any feedback, go ahead and either leave a review and we'll address it there, or send us an email at feedback@themiddleofculture.com. And until next time, everyone, go just read a good book.
Thanks.